We often think of history as a collection of random coincidences, yet some patterns are far too precise to be ignored. We view urban legends as simple campfire stories meant to chill the blood during cold nights. But every so often, the universe reveals a pattern so precise that it shatters our sense of logic. There is a thin, blurry line where documented reality and the supernatural collide, leaving us to wonder if time itself is merely a recurring loop. In the small, quiet town of Erdington, England, this phenomenon did not just happen once. It echoed across a century with terrifying precision. Our story begins in 1817 with a young woman named Mary Ashford. She was 20 years old, known for her vibrant spirit and beauty. On the evening of May 26th, Whit Monday, Mary dressed in her finest clothes to attend a dance at the Tyburn House Inn. It was a night of celebration where the future felt bright and endless. After the festivities, she visited a friend's house to change her clothes before heading home. However, she never arrived. The following morning, on May 27th, her lifeless body was discovered in a water-filled pit in Pipehayes Park. A local man, Abraham Thornton, was accused, sparking community horror. Though acquitted, Mary's death became a dark, lasting footnote in history. For 157 years, her name was just a local ghost story. Then, 1974 arrived. On the very same date, May 27th, another 20-year-old woman named Barbara Forrest went missing in Erdington. Like Mary, Barbara had spent the previous evening dancing and laughing with friends. The coincidences did not stop there. Barbara had also visited a friend before her disappearance, echoing the final movements of a girl she had never met. When the search parties finally found her, the discovery sent a shiver through the country. Barbara's body was found in Pipehayes Park, yards from where Mary was found a century prior. It was as if a ghost had been reborn, only to meet the same fate. When investigators looked at the two cases side by side, the statistical impossibility became undeniable. How could two unrelated individuals across different centuries share such a specific, gruesome destiny? It wasn't just the date or the location. Both women were exactly 20 years old. Both had been raped and strangled. Both had visited a friend's house to change before they were killed. Even more unsettling was the fact that both deaths occurred on the Monday following the Pentecost, known as Whit Monday. The odds of such specific details aligning are billions to one, yet they were written in the cold ink of police reports separated by over 150 years. The most haunting detail emerged when police identified their prime suspect in 1974. His name was Michael Ian Thornton. The surname was identical to the man accused of killing Mary Ashford in 1817. The echo across time was no longer just a theory. It was a cold, hard fact that haunted the local community for years. Two men named Thornton, accused of the same horrific crime against two 20-year-old women in the same park on the same day over a century apart. It is as if the universe had a script it was forced to follow, a tragedy that refused to stay buried in dust. The weight of these events is staggering. Two families, separated by 5 generations, were united by an identical, soul-crushing grief. They shared the same questions, the same fear, and the same lack of ultimate justice, as Michael Thornton was also eventually acquitted. It makes one wonder if some places are cursed, or if time is less like a river and more like a record player, doomed to repeat the same tragic notes. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. As we ponder if history is merely a loop, we must prepare for another mystery, one where a terrifying monster haunting the dark highways of Pennsylvania turned out to be a man hiding a heart-wrenching secret. The transition from the temporal echoes of England leads us to a different kind of haunting in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. For decades, a legend grew like a shadow across the highways of Beaver County. It was the story of the Green Man, or Charlie No-Face. Local teenagers would gather their courage, cruising State Route 351 with headlights dimmed. They spoke of a glowing entity that lurked in the darkness, a figure whose face was a smooth, featureless expanse. The stories described a monster that emitted a faint, radioactive green light stalking the shoulder of the road. To see him was a rite of passage that left hearts hammering. But the terrifying part of this legend was that it was entirely real. The horror belonged to the man they were hunting. The Green Man was Raymond Robinson. His story began in 1919 with a tragic accident. At 8 years old, Raymond climbed a trolley bridge. He touched a high-voltage wire carrying 22,000 volts. The explosion was violent enough to be fatal, yet Raymond survived. The electricity reclaimed a heavy toll. He lost his eyes and his nose. His face was transformed into scar tissue, leaving him with a look that society feared. For the rest of his life, Raymond Robinson lived in near-total isolation. He spent his days at home, listening to the radio and crafting doorstops. He was a man of intelligence and gentleness, yet he knew the sight of him caused panic. This awareness birthed his nightly routine. Driven by a need for fresh air, Raymond would wait until the world was asleep. Under the cover of the moonless sky, he used a walking stick to navigate the highway. He walked for miles in the dark, breathing the cool night air he could not enjoy during the day. This was when the legend took root. The glow people reported was likely the reflection of headlights against his pale skin. To the thrill-seekers, he was a creature of nightmares. They would harass him, shouting insults or even assaulting him. Some stopped their cars to get a closer look, treating a living human being like an exhibit. Yet, Raymond rarely showed anger. He was remarkably kind, often stopping to chat with those who treated him with dignity. In exchange for a cigarette, he would allow people to take his photograph, a heartbreaking transaction where a man sold his own tragedy just to have a moment of social interaction. He was a ghost who had never died, a local myth who had to hear his own existence debated by those who didn't realize he could hear them. The cruelty of the tourists stood in stark contrast to the resilient soul of the man they called a monster. Raymond Robinson's existence was a testament to human endurance in the face of absolute loneliness. He walked those roads for over 60 years, a solitary figure in a world that refused to look him in the eye. When he finally passed away in 1985 at a nursing home, the legend of Charlie No-Face began to fade, but the weight of his reality lingered in the hearts of those who knew the truth. The scary story of the Green Man was never truly a tale of the supernatural. It was a story of a man whose only crime was surviving a horrific tragedy and wanting to feel the breeze on his skin like any other person. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable fact that the most frightening things in our world are often not the monsters we imagine in our heads, but the ways we treat those who do not fit into our rigid definitions of what is normal. Raymond was a man of flesh and blood, seeking the same dignity and respect as anyone else. As we reflect on the deep isolation of Raymond Robinson, we must prepare for a mystery that defies not just our empathy, but our very understanding of geography and boundaries of the world. The transition from the heart-wrenching loneliness of Raymond Robinson leads us directly to a warm July afternoon in 1954 at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. Amidst the constant shifting flow of international travelers, a well-dressed, calm man stepped forward to present his passport. He appeared to be an unremarkable European businessman, middle-aged and professional. He spoke French perfectly and was remarkably fluent in Japanese. Customs saw no issues until they opened his travel documents. The passport looked legitimate, featuring official stamps from previous trips, but it listed his country of origin as a place called Taured. The officials exchanged confused glances. That specific country did not exist. They pulled the traveler aside for questioning, suspecting he was a spy using a high-quality forgery. However, the man was not evasive. He was indignant. He explained clearly that Taured was an ancient, sovereign kingdom located between France and Spain, a nation with a 1,000-year history. When the officials produced a world map and pointed to the Principality of Andorra, the businessman's face drained of color. He became distressed, insisting that where Andorra sat, Taured should be. He accused the officials of playing a cruel joke, his confusion quickly spiraling into a deep, cold panic. For several hours, the interrogation continued. The man produced bank books from a Tauridian bank, a driver's license, and business records showing he was in Tokyo for a series of meetings. All of the documents appeared perfectly authentic. Yet, when officials called the company he claimed to be visiting, they stated they had no records of him or his firm. The hotel where he claimed to have a reservation had no record of his name. He was undeniably a man with a complete life and a history, yet the world he stood in did not recognize a single shred of his identity. Fearing he might be a dangerous operative or a psychological risk, the authorities detained him for the night. They eventually placed him in a room on a high floor of a secure hotel. To ensure he didn't escape, 2 armed guards were stationed directly outside his door. The room was several stories up and had no balcony. The only way out was through the single door the guards were watching. The businessman, exhausted and trembling, was left alone, a man marooned in a world and a reality that didn't belong to him. The following morning, the officials returned to the hotel. When the guards opened the door, the room was silent. The bed was made, and the man was gone. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken window, and no possible way for a human being to have exited without being seen by the sentries. A thorough search of the building yielded absolutely nothing. He had simply evaporated into the thin air. But the mystery grew even more impossible when officials returned to the airport security office. They went to the locked cabinet where they had stored his passport and documents. Upon opening the drawer, they found it empty. Every physical trace of the man from Taured, every physical stamp and detailed page of his existence had vanished along with him. It was as if the universe itself had corrected a clerical error. The businessman had slipped through a crack in space and time, appearing for a brief, flickering moment in a world where he was an impossibility, only to be reclaimed by whatever dimension he truly called home. His story remains a final testament to the idea that our maps are not as definitive as we believe. These 3 stories, the tragic echoes of the Ashford and Forest murders, the lonely walks of the Green Man, and the vanishing traveller from Taured, challenge our perception of logic and safety. They remind us that the thin line between legend and fact is thinner than we think. These narratives leave us with the haunting thought that some stories are not fake because they are impossible, but because they are truths we aren't ready to accept. Some dark secrets hide in plain sight, waiting patiently to slip quietly through the cracks of the fragile world we think we know.